All right, we're live on the internets. People can see us and hear us. So Nelson, behave.
I will try.
All right, thank you. All right, welcome everybody to this fourth and theoretically final conversation on curating or vetting congregational song. This is the fourth of a series, and so if you missed one, two, or three, they're archived and available for free on our YouTube channel. You can just search the Hymn Society's YouTube channel, and they'll pop up as some of our most recent live videos. The first one, my question was, and Deb Loftus and Michael Hahn helped me through this, is kind of what was the history of choosing a congregational song? Like who started putting together these collections or curated lists of songs that were kind of approved or useful or readily accessible for pastors and musicians to choose their congregational song from? And what was the historical trajectory of that? And we heard this kind of blossoming of options that happened, especially once we hit the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries, thanks to the printing press and some other things like that. The choices kept expanding and genres kept getting presented and things like that. And so then I spoke with editors of hymnals from the 80s and 90s and 2000s. Like, what was their process like? These were denominational collections for the most part, although also a kind of cross-denominational bilingual hymnal. What was that like to be a part of a committee that was tasked with putting together a book of songs that congregations would rely upon? And how are those books being used? What was the like? What was success? What were some great stories that came out of that? What were some challenges? Things like that. And so we heard from some great people in that conversation. And then I feel like I missed a conversation. Let's see. It was history, and then well, by golly, I forgot. They've been great conversations though. And this is the fourth and final one. And the fourth and final one is the CCLI Top 100. So if you're not familiar with what that is, there's a list published by CCLI, which is a copywriting and licensing organization. And they've for a long time, for decades, they've been publishing a list of kind of the top 100 songs that are being used by congregations that they're aware of, that go through their organization, and these focus mainly on songs that are copyrighted and within that praise and worship genre, right? How great is our God, and Amazing Grace, My Chains Are Gone, and that kind of genre of song. Although also songs like How Great Thou Art has historically been on the CCLI Top 100. Um, and so in 2015 or years ago, well before the pandemic, the Methodists did a project where most of those songs were not in their published songbooks, and definitely not in the 1989 Methodist hymnal. So they put together a team to like vet the CCLI Top 100 and say, you know what, for Wesleyan United Methodist congregations, these are the songs out of the CCLI Top 100 that really seem like really good fits for our theology and our worship styles and our communities in general. And that really piqued my interest because it was the first time I had seen an outside group from CCLI actually trying to use those lists to then make a smaller list to say these are the ones that really work well for our tradition. So then other people started jumping on board. Other traditions started saying, like, this actually might be a really useful thing to do. And so what we have today is a group of people who've all led projects or been a part of projects from their own traditions and uh, pieces of the church body, um, that have done the same thing. They've vetted the CCLI Top 100 lists, such as they are, and said like, "Hey, these are the ones that seem to really fit well for our traditions." So that's where we are. And I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves in the order that they did their projects. So Nelson's going to go first because he's I think we all agree he's the grandfather of this process. You can just tell he's, getting gray hairs and stuff already. I can see it. And then Katie with the Reformed group, Clayton with the Lutheran group, and then Sarah with the Anabaptist group. So introduce yourselves. Why are you here? Where are you coming from, or zooming? Where are you zooming from? And yeah, and how'd you get involved in the project, I guess? So Nelson,
Thanks, Brian. I will hold dear to my heart the grandfather term. Yes, it's yeah, really resonates.
I'll send you a walker later.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Nelson Cowan. I serve as director of the Center for Worship and the Arts at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church, and I arrived at this project in 2015 on the original kind of vetting team as a member of the vetting team for a few years. And then a few years later after that, I took the role of project manager for our second iteration of the project called CCLI Top 100 and Beyond. So we love a good Toy Story reference, Buzz Lightyear. Yeah. So glad to be on the call today.
I'm scrambling trying to come up with like a really good Toy Story reference for myself, and I'm not going to get there today. It's not going to happen. My name is Katie Rulofs. Coming to you from my home, which is right outside the Washington, D.C. area in Silver Spring, Maryland. When I took on this project through the Reformed lens in particular, I was serving the Christian Reformed Church in North America as their denominational worship consultant. Since moved on from that role, but still very involved in lots of things Reformed worship. And also, Brian, you left out the part that like one of the reasons a lot of us got into this project is because you said, hey, this would be fascinating if you all started doing these things. And the need was there, but you just gave us the prompting to
I
do so.
did do some nudging.
So yeah, glad to be here today.
Hey everybody, I'm Clayton, and I serve as the Dean of the Chapel at Wartburg Theological Seminary in Dubuque, Iowa, and I am a pastor in the ELCA, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And I also serve as a pastor at a church in rural Wisconsin. And my role in this work comes from another thing I do, which is the editor of Cross Accent, the journal for the Association of Lutheran Church Musicians. And the ALCM, put together a team to do our vetting work, and we've published it in the journal as well. And so that's what brings me here.
Hello, my name is Sarah Kathleen Johnson. I'm an assistant professor of liturgy and pastoral theology at St. Paul University, which is in Ottawa, Ontario, and that's where I'm joining you from today. I served on the editorial team for Voices Together, a hymnal and worship book published by Mennonite Church Canada and Mennonite Church USA in 2020, which I believe you focused on in a previous conversation. But that was my gateway to being a co-project director for the Anabaptist CCLI Top 100 and Beyond project with my co-project directors, Annalie Leptison and Emily Ralph Servant. Our project is not formally affiliated with a specific Anabaptist denomination. It is funded by a Calvin Institute of Christian Worship, Vital Preaching grant that is held by Mosaic Mennonite Conference, which is in kind of the northeastern-ish region of the United States. And that is being pursued then in partnership with Together in Worship, a website of free worship resources from Anabaptist sources, and with the Anabaptist Worship Network that brings together people for these kinds of events.
It's very on point that you wouldn't be officially, under an organizational, thing because the Anabaptists. But I always found it funny. This is a sidebar, but when Baptist organizations or Anabaptists like complain about their like larger organization telling them something they don't like, and I'm just like, just don't listen. But anyways, that's a different thing. So you reminded me, Katie, or sorry, Sarah, that the third conversation was from current pastors and church musicians on how they're selecting song and what that process is like and what that kind of week to week situation is like in their various contexts. So that's the third conversation. Thank you. All right, so we'll start with Nelson again in that same order. Describe what was your process like? Like, first of all, how did you choose your team members? Like, how do you choose a group to do this kind of work? looking through the CCLI Top 100 and kind of vetting it? And then what was the process like? How do you decide how to vet it? I mean, we only have an hour, so this is the Spark Notes version. But what was that process like?
Yes, this will be the Cliff Notes version. We'll have a robust amount of links to supply you all with for deeper engagement. But I'll share a little bit about the evolution. I would say, when we started the process in 2015, I would say we were more kind of scholarly centric in in the composition of our team. We also tend to be a lot more white and male than our team is now. But we focused a lot in that round. We were just evaluating the CCLI Top 100, and we came up with a lovely system which you can read more about that had a lovely balance between theology, language, and performance practice. And so a lot of this was adapted from guidelines from our 1989 hymnal. Some of it was also kind of new theology categories that were kind of created fresh for this process. And when I became the project manager, we knew that a big deficit of our initial project was not so much the composition of the team, but it was the material that we were evaluating. As I think we can all affirm, a lot of the CCLI Top 100 songs are overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly male, and come from traditions that may not reflect our United Methodist tradition. And so when we moved to a different model, we also wanted to make sure that our team represented kind of the fullness of our denomination. And so we were paying very close attention to kind of geography, where people were coming from. And for us, that means jurisdiction, language, and of course, other important kind of demographic variables for the folks on our team. And we also leaned more heavily on the practitioner side instead of the scholarly side, and not just evaluating as much the focusing so much on the text of the song, but the kind of the text in relation to the whole song, in relation to how it's practiced in an actual congregational liturgy. So I'll stop there and say you can read more about our particular theological categories and all that kind of stuff later. But
I do want to just bookmark that for this whole group, though. At some point, maybe we can circle back around to like, how do songs carry with them theology above and beyond the text? So how do you process that, and how do you determine like what theologies are being carried by the song above and beyond the text? And what does that mean for our communities? I think that's a really interesting question we could circle back to as a larger group. But Katie, what was your process like?
So I basically took what Nelson did. No, I'm kidding. But Nelson, I will say that Nelson built a really solid foundation for the rest of us to enter in upon. That the work that he and his team did was fantastic. So I recommend that to all of the listeners today, to start there in many ways, because Nelson built us a really nice foundation. But I came into this project, like I said, as a denominational worship consultant, as somebody who's used to dealing with a really wide spectrum of churches. Churches who are trying to pull off CCLI Top 100 with one pianist that doesn't read charts, all the way to like the large praise band, to the amateur guitarist. So just coming at it and knowing that I had like a really broad spectrum of congregations to work with. One of my primary goals when we started this, particularly for the Reformed voice, was to come at it from a formational perspective. Thinking about the way that congregational song forms and changes us over time. So our team, which was a pretty nice mix of scholars, practitioners, a very interesting mix. We came at it largely from the perspective of the formative value of congregational song. We definitely wanted to have the conversation about like certain songs and like certain trends, but largely we were thinking about it kind of in like a macro way, rather than like the micro of song by song, which we all could have sat on that call for hours and like torn a song apart one by one. But what we were largely looking for was larger trends. Because of that, I pulled in college and our university chaplains from Reformed institutions, just mindful of the fact that formation starts a lot younger than we think it does. And so it's not just the work that happens in the pew and sanctuaries, but what's happening in our universities and in our colleges, forming those like kind of emerging adults and those emerging worshipers, I thought was an important thing and an important voice to get in. So when you look at the Reform team, you'll see there were 4 different universities represented there, college chaplains to professors and the whole spectrum.
And I put the link to the most recent United Methodist project, as well as the Reformed, and then I'll continue with the links in the YouTube chat, so folks that are listening in can see that, and it'll be there when people catch the archives as well. Another thing you just made me think of, Katie, that maybe we could bookmark as well is what I've heard from the very beginning of this process in my historical conversations, and then the hymnal projects, and then the local church musicians and pastors, is this struggle of knowing that congregational song is formative and that but it's being chosen at the local level. But the local level folks are in the week to week grind of ministry. And it's very hard to like stop and kind of think real big picture and think, how are we forming our people with our song diet? Because it's like, man, I got to do 5 visitations and I got to do this funeral that's coming up. And then I also have Sunday morning worship coming up. And so there's this uh, big picture folks who are doing these types of projects all throughout history, but now specifically these, to try to help that process of thinking through these are the healthy choices. So hopefully the local leaders have some guidance and they don't have to do that all the time. Anyways, something to bookmark. All right, Clayton.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to being a pastoral in your sense of selection of songs is that's what you're speaking to. Somebody with a pastor's heart and giftings and an eye towards formation has to be doing these things, and that's where these lists and these projects come in. So the Lutheran perspective on this was kind of hosted by the Association of Lutheran Church Musicians, and I worked with our team as through that association, and like a good church project, we just took volunteers. Like whoever wants to do this can do it, and it wasn't a large group. We had enough though to get it done. So there was about 5 of us, I believe, that worked on the project, and they were just members of the ALCM. And I will say that that's kind of one of the tricky things, truly, probably from any denominational perspective, but from the Lutherans, there's a broad spectrum of theology and thought around even worship in the Lutheran world. And so we recognize that up front. The ALCM is a pan-Lutheran organization. It has representation from multiple sides of the Lutheran world, but the members of our little vetting team were predominantly ELCA. Not entirely, but predominantly. So that tells you something about the nature of the people that are looking at the songs. But yes, we also kind of copied and pasted what the Methodists did for us because it was such a great foundation. And so we took their rubric and their ideas and their document and tweaked it for Lutheran purposes and really lifted up, I think, the key things that we lifted up in terms of our theology were grace being central, law and gospel as a core idea around Lutheran theology, and sacramentality. And I think that honestly is probably where the most friction is in contemporary worship and Lutheran worship is we're clearly at the table and at the font is where we experience God's presence. Whereas, in most contemporary worship, we're singing ourselves into God's presence. And so there's some, that's kind of where we come from. And so to find contemporary songs that are written with an eye towards sacramentality and the table and the font and it's easy to find songs about grace. It's not as easy to find songs in the other areas. So that was what we worked on.
Nice. Thanks, Clayton. And Sarah, the only group that hasn't released their results. I'm chomping at the bit.
Yes. We Anabaptists are latecomers to the CCLI Top 100 and Beyond process. So we started our process in the fall of 2024. That was anchored in a retreat that took place in November 2024. And we are not done yet, as you note. And we're not even sure what done would look like at this point, too, which is part of why we're not done. But we can talk more about that later. In terms of our team, our key goals in selecting team members, one was to bring together Anabaptists from across denominations. So this isn't one tradition, it's Mennonite Church USA and Mennonite Church Canada who often work together, but it's also Mennonite Brethren and Church of the Brethren, Neo-Anabaptist. We're traditions that don't have a shared confession of faith, that don't have shared institutional bodies or points of reference. So in addition to bringing Anabaptists together across denominations, we also wanted to prioritize bringing together Anabaptists from across cultural traditions, especially recognizing that this repertoire is very central in Anabaptist congregations that worship in languages other than English or that have a second generation congregation worshiping in English. So this intercultural approach was a key priority for us in the process. We also wanted to bring together participants who know and love these songs. The question here was not whether we should be singing these songs, but rather recognizing that we are worshiping with these songs and inviting theological reflection on that reality. So we wanted to spend our time there, spend our time thinking about how can we support theologically Anabaptist worship in congregations that use contemporary worship music as a starting point. But in Anabaptist fashion, we did not start with theological categories. We had a grassroots inductive process. So we had a pre-meeting online, or a couple of pre-meetings with all of the participants, and we asked each person to do three things. To look at the CCLI top 10 and name one or two songs that they saw as most aligned with Anabaptist theology, and one or two songs that raised the most questions from an Anabaptist perspective. And then we talked about that. We also asked each person to identify two or three sources that they would turn to determine whether a song has Anabaptist theology, and a range of sources were mentioned there. And then for the beyond category, we asked each person to suggest one or two songs not included in the CCLI Top 100 that are especially resonant with Anabaptist theology and that they would encourage congregations to sing and that could work in contemporary worship. So we did this kind of groundwork to kind of more inductively develop our process. Before the retreat, everyone rated the top 100 songs and added comments. Everyone suggested songs for the Beyond list. And then we spent time together praying and worshiping and discussing theological themes and discussing specific songs and reflecting on how to move forward.
Nice. Yes, that's another great bookmark. We have a lot of bookmarks already on the oh shoot.
The docket. That wasn't what you're looking for, was it? Yeah.
No, but that's another interesting, but just the way you talked about processing the songs from a standpoint of what do you find really resonates, and then like what was the questions that were raised, right, by certain songs, and then the conversations that ensued from that, and I think maybe that's the first thing I want to chew on together is during this process for each one of your teams, were there moments that surprised you as far as like overwhelming, like, wow, this one is just like a home run and I wasn't expecting that. Like everyone seems to say this is like perfect for our tradition, or were there moments where it was like, that's the one that we're questioning, or that's an interest, like those moments where things were getting teased out that you found unexpected. That's for everyone, anyone.
First comment is there's a lot of songs that talk about bones. First observation.
Bones.
That needs to be researched. Just saying.
Dim bones, dim dry bones. Like that's not on the CCLI Top 100.
I think for us, the first time we were doing this, the and beyond iteration of the project, so 2021, we would have been doing this in 2020. What am I adding? years in 2020. So, as you might know, it was a tumultuous time in the United Methodist Church with kind of, and also there's a global pandemic, and we're trying to figure out who we are as United Methodists and who we're going to be in the future. And, and so and the and Beyond project was a part of that because we wanted to make sure that we were attentive to a variety of diversities and making sure, like as we were adding songs to supplementing the CCLI list, we wanted to make sure that some of these songs represent us and potentially a new emerging United Methodism. And what's I think interesting and messy and beautiful at the same time is as we were evaluating some songs that might seem a bit more kind of maybe more progressive lyrics, for instance, something you might not sing in a very kind of traditionalist, conservative United Methodist church. It was interesting to see the team. They might be theologically aligned with that particular song, but this balancing that with kind of these core Wesleyan convictions and like pastoral sensibility of like, okay, well, this song we might really like this, but we've got to check our own intentions and say like just because we like this doesn't mean that we recommend this. And that was a really interesting kind of process for us, and that's why as we evaluate, sure we have this really boring spreadsheet we all use, but the spreadsheet is just a conversation starter. Like that's the purpose of the spreadsheet, is to start to have a solid foundation from which a conversation, and that's where the decision making truly happens in the conversation. And so for me, that was the kind of interesting. I expected like this just a bunch of just progressive like songs coming, being put forth, and and then having some more progressive members on the team saying, yeah, probably not. We shouldn't do that. So that was a really, like I said, I think beautiful, messy, and kind of, complex part of our process, at least.
Our process was also complex. That's a good word. And that we were not able to reach a consensus on results. And that's one of the reasons why we haven't shared a list. So we're still navigating what it looks like for us to move forward. But just for one window into that, at the retreat, we were using green and red and yellow cards just to do temperature checks, not as a formal vote. And there were only 6 songs that received all green cards, but aspects of those songs still raised questions. And this is partly because it was so apparent that, as something you highlighted earlier, Brian, the meaning and function of a song is about far more than its lyrics. And the same song means very different things in different contexts. So for example, you might have noticed there are quite a few songs on this list that use language of violence, of victory, of conquest. And you might think, oh, Anabaptist, this is a peace church tradition. This would obviously be a problem. But it's much more complex than that for us. Because this scriptural language of violence and victory, maybe it is problematic for dominant culture groups to use this imagery. But at the same time, this language of victory is really important for congregations that experience marginalization in the past and the present. So how do we navigate that these same songs are meaning very different things in different settings when what we're doing is creating a list? So this kind of tension led to experiment with some different approaches. So I can tell you about our current experiments, and we'll see what happens with them. But we have 2 ways that we're experimenting with the CCLI Top 100 list. And one is tagging songs with themes instead of putting them into categories. So helping congregations who are looking for songs that reflect certain priorities to find those songs more easily. So for example, we might tag songs that include violent language with a violent language tag, or we would tag songs that include only gender neutral language for God with a gender neutral tag, so that leaders looking for that type of material can more easily identify it. And then we would offer some theological reflection on these different themes to provide some guidance for thinking about whether or not to choose songs with those markers in a specific setting. We're also aspiring to provide commentary on every song, but that's a larger task. But we also realized in the process of working with the CCLI Top 100 in this way that we also wanted to think about the beyond in some other ways too. with one way of having a kind of evolving playlist that can share beyond songs and kind of provide an alternative avenue for songs to reach communities. And then the other is to build on a past very successful experience with a songwriting retreat that was focused on writing contemporary worship music, Anabaptists writing contemporary worship music at the intersection with interculturality. So to think about how do we not just receive songs, but also curate songs and create songs in other ways.
Well, that's the second. So it's interesting because you were one of the last pieces of this puzzle that you actually incorporated the beyond process into your questioning from
Yes,
from the
thank you,
get-go.
United Methodists.
Right. And it's because the Methodist, you did I think it was a 2015 project was the first one, right, Nelson? Yeah. And then it took a good many years to then formulate a new team to reconceptualize and say, okay, now what would this look like if we did a beyond? I'm wondering if these conversations came up in the Reformed and Lutheran processes. Like, did you reach a point where where the whole team was like, man, there's nothing here that we need. And well, did that come up at all? Or did you just stay task oriented on let's process this list?
Go ahead, Katie.
The reform team had such a hard time just knowing where to start. It was kind of like a writer's block of sorts that like once you get like that first page out, then it's easy to get going. But we had such a hard time even getting past that initial meeting. Because when you start to look at like how to vet a song, as Sarah already mentioned, like there is an endless number of paths in which you could follow. Like we went down the militaristic road, we went down the gender neutral, we went down like every single one of those, like ableism, how close is it to the biblical text, that like what we had to like really think about what were our reform distinctives. And
Yeah.
even within that conversation, we got so bogged down and so just like that was another piece that kind of drove the larger formational trend for us. That actually helped once we broadened the scope a little bit and said, instead of going just like reformed distinctives, what do we think is important formational trends for the reformed churches in general? Also, as Clayton said, reformed being a really broad term. We have everyone from like the regulative principle folks all the way to like a very, very contemporary style of worship. So we never got to the beyond because we just like we had to get going somewhere. And once we were going, the process went relatively smooth. We did similar to Sarah, like first meeting, we threw out the top 10 and talked through them together.
Sure.
And that's a fascinating experience. So for anyone who is listening and wants to start somewhere, just get a group of like diverse voices in a room and take the top 10 and talk it through and just see what happens.
That could be a fun exercise for like a music and worship committee at a local level. You could, for time's sake, you could even just do the top 5 or something and just say like, let's just go through each one of these. And what do you think about these songs and how do you process these? What are your personal experiences of them? And could be a fun conversation starter for that local level of choosing and curating your own song. That's cool.
Yeah, I think we all realize that once you open this can of worms, it's really hard to try and put any kind of boundaries around what it is that you're trying to do. Mainly because the CCLI Top 100 list gets updated twice annually.
Exactly.
At least it used to. I don't check it regularly, but when it turns over so frequently, you can't even finish what you've started before the next one's there. And that's in some sense the nature of that style of music. And so, yeah, putting a project together, it's quarterly now. Thank you. Yeah, our group worked in 2021 with December 2021 release of the top 100. We
Sure.
didn't publish the results till 2023.
Right.
And so it was outdated by the time it got in people's hands. But
Sure.
in some sense, it's like we're all saying, it's the process is really just to start the conversation. And I think more than anything, we want to just announce that we should think about these choices. And here's a rubric, here's a guideline, here's a series of lenses that we can look at songs and for the Lutherans we looked at like I said, predominantly the same lenses that the Methodist Project went through in terms of theology and language and musicality. We looked at them the same way, but tweaked the theology to be core to Lutheran identity. And I think for us, at least for me, one of the most shocking kind of things is that of that group of 100 songs, only 13 we felt qualified as Trinitarian, that were explicitly naming the Trinity in some form. And that I'm cautious about that, because I think the way that I think Christianity has a way of being homogenized, and in doing so, we lose some of the distinctives. And to me, the Trinitarian theology is central. And if we lose it in our songs, if it does not maintain a centrality, I'm cautious about what that means, and if we don't sing that frequently enough going forward. And so that's something that definitely caught our attention, caught my attention.
Yeah.
And also the sacramental piece, which I mentioned, like very almost the same number of songs, like 17 out of the 100, we felt spoke to either some sort of sacramental experience in terms of baptism or communion. And those, again, are central to our identity and our theology. And if the songs aren't there to support that, what are we losing?
So let's shift into one of my questions that I sent you guys ahead of time is kind of in the history of congregational song vetting, like how do you see these projects fitting in? And one of the reasons that Clayton, your comments just made me think of that is like when I think of past hymnal projects, most certainly for denominational books like in the 80s with the all the major denominations I feel like came out with hymnals in the 80s and early 90s. But then subsequent books after that, and even books that weren't denominationally based in the 1800s and 1900s, you get a lot of categorization, right? You'll have indices in the back where you'll have a whole section on Trinitarian hymns and a whole section on communion hymns, or a whole section, or even the whole hymnal is the salvation story, right? With your birth narratives, and then your Jesus hymns, and your Easter hymns, and then your Pentecost hymns. It kind of goes through the whole like story, and so it's a very careful curation to make sure that it is a kind of like well-rounded, right? That you're not going to end up with 99 songs about Jesus, one about God, and none about the Holy Spirit, or 100 Christmas carols and then one Easter hymn. It's this attempt at being well-rounded. So is that how you see this project in some ways, is kind of like just helping people see like, here are your options, and if you want to be well-rounded, like there's 13. I don't know. You're shaking your head, Sarah. Like, how do you see this project fitting in?
Yeah. So I also served on the editorial team for a hymnal and on many Voices Together subcommittees, including the Popular Idioms subcommittee that worked with contemporary worship music.
It's a good name.
So, yeah. So I've thought a lot about this repertoire in the context of hymnals as well. And we certainly evaluated not just the current CCLI Top 100, but all of the CCLI lists back to the 1980s as part of that process, and ended up with about 70 songs in the 659 songs in Voices Together that could be considered contemporary worship music. So this is a significant increase from previous hymnals, but those songs are still serving hymnal-using congregations. And I think this is the key difference for me with the CCLI Top 100 projects, which is audience. These are projects for a different audience. So the CCLI Top 100 project is really intended for congregations that are using some or all contemporary worship music. These are not congregations that will or should use a hymnal. It just does not suit their expression of worship in almost all cases. So then the question is, what does it look like to support theological reflection on music and worship in these settings? So we need to ask what is useful here for navigating this repertoire, maybe to suggest other songs that align with this repertoire, this expression of worship, while also expanding on it, if that's one of the goals, to expand into different theological themes or create something that you might describe as more balanced. But there's that kind of usefulness. But then there's also this sense of how our communities accessing and selecting and learning and teaching songs, which is generally not in a bound print collection, but from online resources, and songs that are learned by ear rather than from the printed page. So how do we provide material that makes sense in this worship context instead of in a hymnal using worship context, which is just a very different audience, very different task. So I think that's what we're trying to do in the Anabaptist version of this, is to resource those congregations for whom this is their home place of worship.
For us, we had right before we did our 2015 round. In 2014, we had a Future of United Methodist Worship Symposium in the beautiful landscape of Dayton, Ohio. And sorry, Ohio people.
The future of Methodism, Dayton.
Dayton,
It's a new
Ohio.
slogan.
We gathered, anyway. And while we were there, Chuck Fromm, the late Chuck Fromm, who was the kind of founder of the Worship Leader magazine, and he was presenting with our group, and he reflected on how, a hymnal is, it's a vetted collection of songs, and that, that particular insight, that started a conversation there about like, how do we vet congregational songs that are not hymnal bound, and so I want to also name too that while I maybe in this group might be the grandfather of this, there there were some other, I need to say, like, I did not come up with this idea. So this was, all this, the United Methodist Project, kind of the wisdom of the project rests on folks like Taylor Burton Edwards at Discipleship Ministries, Jackson Henry, Cynthia Wilson, and now with folks like Diana Sanchez Bouchong, and then scholars like Lester Ruth, who gave really early feedback into some kind of the theological weight of this and some of the categorizations we use. So I want to name that too, lest you all think I'm way cooler than I actually am.
Named elders.
Yeah. And but that's we're evaluating songs that are not in a hymnal, and we recognize that I think like many songs, whether they are kind of traditional strophic hymnody or a contemporary worship song or a praise chorus, songs, I don't think people, at least people with any kind of humility, they don't set out to write songs they're not gonna pen the song and think this is gonna last 300 years. Um, I don't think, I mean, maybe some people have that amount of hubris. I don't know. I'm sure it exists, but you know, songs, when you write a song, you write it for a particular time, a particular place. That's especially true of contemporary worship. Like many songs are intended to have a short shelf life. Like that is its purpose. Um, and so, but all this to say is we used this template from the CCLI Top 100 and Beyond project for the United Methodist Hymnal Revision Committee. So I served on our committee, and that is what we used when we waded through nearly 2,000 songs of our 11,000 submissions before our funding ran out. Um, uh, Footnote back to the denominational instability of the time. But CCLI Song Select for many worship leaders is that kind of container, is that hymnal for people that they're using. And just to throw another link into the mix, like at least in the United Methodist Church, we have a landing page actually on CCLI. I'll put it in this, and if you want to repost that, Brian, you can. But it actually, see a Song Select from CCLI cross-references now with all of our hymnals and most recent hymnal, sorry, not all of our hymnals, our 1989 hymnal and 3 recent congregational song supplements, and our commended songs list from all the versions of our CCLI Top 100. And
I just threw that on the YouTube chat, so folks, you have that
yes,
if you want to check it out. And there are some other lists like that, right, Nelson? It's not just a Methodist version. There's some other versions.
I think there's some other, yeah. I think we're the only ones that I know of that have a cross where they cross-reference it with our kind of vetting project.
Oh, nice. Okay.
But others, if we can do it, y'all can do it. So there are ways to do this.
Anything you can do, I can do better. It's like the theme song of Protestants.
I think part of what I'm hearing in both of these examples, though, is how these categories are really breaking down. The idea that like hymnals are clearly a space for vetting non-contemporary worship music. Contemporary worship music exists in this online space that's not vetted. Like we're seeing that those distinctions are no longer as significant as they once might have been, and there's a lot more fluidity there than many people may assume.
Yeah, for sure. I'm, I've done a presentation about the dichotomy of traditional and contemporary song. It's one of my like canned presentation I've done in various places, and at one point I was titling it "Thanks but No Thanks 1990s," of like kind of labeling those two things as like diametrically opposed or opposites or whatever, and ne'er the two shall meet. But it's like, no, it was never really a thing. And I feel like we're only now at the point, maybe post COVID has really kicked this into gear or something. But I think that people have finally just given up the idea that one of those two is going to go away, or that one of those two is bad, or that one of those two is not useful, or whatever the case may be, and that it's just more complex than that, and that all of them have things to offer, have downsides, have upsides, how you contextualize them matters, and yeah, so this is like a piece of that puzzle of like saying, hey, we need to vet these songs. It's an important piece of the process. But it's just hasn't been done before really. So how do we do that? Did I just parrot that back to you appropriately? I was trying to summarize in my own way.
One of
Not
our goals
mansplain.
too that we had stated is that we wanted to give churches within our tradition a toolbox rather than a weapon, because we recognize the potential for that up front, right? That like an angry congregation member could show up and like wave this list in the face of their worship director and say, look, it's a red song, we shouldn't be singing it. And there is the potential there for that kind of dynamic of like the weaponization of like congregational song and vetting like this. But instead like opted to like give it like toolbox language, that like, hey, again, we have so many different options between hymnals, between contemporary songs, between all of these things. How can we best equip and add tools to that toolbox to allow churches contextually to be able to do this work for themselves, honoring context, honoring difference, and still giving people something of a toolbox to carry with them as they go.
I find that really just so helpful in general, not just for the vetting process and the choosing of congregational songs as far as the literature, but also thinking through like the pedagogy and the execution of the songs. I know the Methodists talked about this a good bit when the initial singability categorization was changed and revised because it was like, well, what is singable by a congregation can be significantly different. So like yeah, okay, this song is Green from the CCLI Top 100, but if you don't have a really awesome guitarist, you may not be able to pull it off. Just like you may not be able to pull off this like amazing hymn tune if you don't have an organist in a space that can let it soar. Certain things may fall flat depending on your instrumentation and the skill sets of your leadership. Um, are you comfortable leading rote? Are you comfortable leading, maybe you need a click track in a band that's really cued in. There's all these like other elements so I love the idea of a toolkit, right? So it's like, what tools do we have available to make good choices and to make choices that we can pull off, well. These are all, I love that imagery. Thank you, Katie.
We felt it important to kind of add a visual to that. We learned that people were, they would hear this beautiful, like multi-layered song, this beautiful master track, and they're like, I could never do this. And there was just kind of a lack of, for either this is a very, very part-time, musician or someone who's, they do this because they love their church, not because they think they're an expert. You've got all a range of folks leading contemporary worship in our churches. And so we wanted to provide, we didn't call them like bad videos, but like videos that showed real congregations doing this song, you know, and how you could actually make this, this actually fit. So we always had, we tried to like link the master track, and then we also linked at least one or two alternative arrangements, just so people could actually see how this could work in their congregations.
With or without pitch correction, Nelson?
Without.
It's like it's the conference phenomenon where you go to a conference and it's like this awesome mountaintop experience, and so you bring that thing back to your congregation, and then it doesn't work well, and you're like, but it was so good last week at this thing. It's like that, except technology has made it so that we have these amazing like mastered tracks that are so clean and so well, like so highly produced, and then you hear it on Sunday morning and you're like, that wasn't even close. Like it's constant, like that phenomenon is now available to us every week. So instead of the one time you go to a conference. Um, yeah, interesting. So we only have about 10 minutes left before, I want to respect everyone's time. And it's like Sarah, if you all don't know, you should be grateful for Sarah's presence today. She's been up since 3 a.m., is what you said, because she was presenting at another conference that was happening on the other side of the Atlantic, in Assisi. So, which is, if you don't know about that conference happening, it's very cool work, very interesting things if you're into the world of liturgy and all these things. It's on, is it called the Feast of Creation? Is that the title that they're going with? Or
That's what we were talking about this morning. But it
okay,
is an addition to the Western liturgical calendar, recognizing God as creator, and responding to the needs of our time.
so we need a vetting team to go through the CCLI Top 100 in conjunction with this new potential feast day that's going
There
to be
are two
happening.
music panels tomorrow.
Woo! Yeah, I think the Hymn
Yeah,
Society is
yeah,
throwing some people
part of,
out there.
yeah, and
Yeah,
they're so excited that the Hymn Society is having a commission or a competition for this theme for this upcoming conference as
that's right.
well.
That was our hymn search topic, because we just wanted to ride that wave, and it's such a great topic, so rich, so many things to explore. But anywho, so thanks for being here, Sarah. The last thing I wanted to just ask, as we see our way out of this conversation, is so what happens next? Like, what do you hope will come out of your projects? Um, how do you hope they'll be used? I mean, we've already touched on that a little bit, the toolkit idea and things like this. But and then, do you see other processes or other committees, other ways of doing this? Does that need to happen? If so, spitball some ideas. Maybe someone listening will take the next step. So what's next on this topic? And the Methodists can't go first because they already went first. Constantly, you're always going first. You gotta take a back seat on this one, Methodist. Calm down.
We don't know what to do until the Methodists do something, though. So,
That's right. Oh no, we've lost our leader.
I mean, in some sense, I'm not joking. Like we truly are kind of following in the footsteps here of what other projects have been. But I think, yeah, the hope is that there's some kind of this turns into something that's functional for people in the real world that are selecting songs. And the other thing I wanted to point out was that at least from our perspective, one of the ideas that this lifted up, this vetting project, was that there is a real ethics behind what songs you choose. And in in songs that are being written by churches that sometimes function more as corporations than churches, and that are sometimes led by abusive people that are propped up by corporate churches that continue to hide and allow abuse to continue. I think that is as much a concern as anything, and the ethical decision of what it means to sing those songs that come from those contexts. I mean, if you pay attention to where your food and your clothes come from, I think you just as much have to pay attention to where your songs come from, and who is writing them, and what harm might be done through those people. And that's to say nothing about grace and forgiveness and reconciliation and all those reparations and good things. But when there's active harm, the choice to sing songs is something you have to do carefully.
If you're interested in that topic, folks, first of all, yeah, there have been conversations at various denominational levels about this. Kate, um, help me, folks at GIA. Um, Kate Williams, thank you. Kate Williams at GIA and I had a wonderful conversations about this where she led a session on this on our behalf, and it's free and available on the YouTube channel as well. So she really digs into a lot of those issues on how to really be survivor focused and what that means and how that plays out. So there are resources out there, and it's an important topic. So thank you, Clayton, for mentioning it, and certainly look into those conversations and be thoughtful. What else?
Can the Methodists go second? No.
Fine, fine.
In terms of like what I hope happens next, I think there's the United Methodist Church is in a kind of a trust crisis right now. There's trust levels in the institution that are at a, despite the kind of the good things happening in the denomination and kind of a reorienting toward the future. I still think trust levels are low within the kind of the ranks of within the hierarchy, I suppose. And so I think a project like this can help rekindle some of the trust, at least on the local level. So I think, a lot of the folks who are doing, at least in the UMC context, a lot of the folks who are doing, at least initially, were doing contemporary worship tended to come from larger congregations, and they didn't necessarily need this resource. And then if they did need it, they looked on it with suspicion because it came from the denomination. Now, some of those churches have left and disaffiliated and moved on. We bless them. We thank them. All that stuff. But the truth is that so many congregations now of all sizes are doing. It's just what we do. That is just a way of being right now, and they are looking for these resources. And I do hope that trust is rekindled as the United Methodist Church continues to kind of grow into its new self. And I hope as a part of that, there is, yes, another new round of vetting. It's my hope, like usually at least my own like internal clock says, once we get like a year and a half past the project, then I start bothering discipleship ministries again and say, hey, hi, yeah, there have been lots of CCLI lists now. It's time. Yeah, that's usually there's an internal rhythm. It will happen soon, and so hopefully that will also become a part of our regular rhythm. But I want to see a new hymnal in the UMC, and at least in our previous hymnal discussions, like that hymnal was going to be hybrid, like in terms of there was going to be a bound thing, and there was going to be an online, continuously expanding repository of vetted songs. So that's what I'm hopeful for.
That reminds me, the United Church of Canada has just finished their new hymnal project, which is more than just a printed hymnal, but it's really designed as a full digital resource that has a printed component. It was a big project that took a lot of time to do it, and they chose 0 out of the CCLI Top 100 for their collection of almost 1,000 songs, I think, if I'm getting my numbers right. Then Let Us Sing is the title. Yeah, thanks, Nelson. So that's an interesting tidbit on the topic. But anywho, what else?
Yeah. Well, speaking of online and evolving resources, Together in Worship is the Anabaptist version of that. So this is a free collection of online resources from Anabaptist sources, managed under Creative Commons copyright. And I do hope eventually a resource expressing some Anabaptist reflection on the CCLI Top 100 and beyond will be posted on Together in Worship.
So that's the plan, is to post it there.
It would end up there. This is one of the organizations sort of collaborating on this project. So if you're wondering if there is something in several years, you could check there and see. But in terms of the bigger picture hope, I would say my hope for this project is very similar to the hope I have with much of the worship resourcing that I do with church leaders, which is to really encourage leaders to make intentional choices that are theologically grounded, that are contextually appropriate, and that are oriented towards God's justice.
Thank you. Katie, anything to send us away?
Circles at this point in time. Every conversation that we have had, whether they are positive or negative, whether people are angry or whether they're really happy with how the project turned out, every time someone is talking about it, they're fulfilling the goal of what the original team wanted in the first place, was to get people in dialogue actually talking about this and thinking about it.
Yeah.
Because it does not happen enough. And one final thing is people aren't bound to the CCLI Top 100, nor are they bound to the other 100 songs that are in their collection. So if we can broaden the scope and say, if you don't like this song, rather than rewriting it and violating copyright, you can actually go and find another song. And it's out there if you take the time to look for it. But
Yeah.
broaden the scope.
And if this is a topic that you just really love and you love research about it, or you want more numbers about it, or just more information about the contemporary song world, there's a wonderful group. None of this will take you four by surprise, but if you don't know and you're watching on YouTube, there's a group called Worship Leader Research, and I put their website in the YouTube feed. It's just got a lot of great articles that are written by folks who are doing the research on like where are these songs coming from, yeah, what churches and people are producing these, how do they get produced, where's the money going, all these types of questions are they're trying to answer these by actually researching it, and then they're just publishing it for free for folks to use and read about. So check it out; it's pretty cool. And some of the people that I don't even are any of y'all a part of that directly. I know that we all know people that are involved with it, and some of the people that were on some of the committees are involved in it. So it's just it's this interweaving of efforts to be thoughtful, to do our research, to think theologically, to think pastorally, and to lead our people well. So that is just a great way. Thank you all for being the capstone of this conversation. It's been so rich for me to hear from so many different people and to learn so much. And I hope that if you've watched any of these conversations along the way with me, that you've also learned a lot and just been inspired to look into these resources, to use them, or maybe even create some of your own. So thanks for joining me on the journey. And take care, everyone, post Easter, and get ready for Pentecost. Thanks for